The wind whipped across the vast, empty plains of northern Montana with a ferocity that seemed personal, a relentless assault on anything small and vulnerable. For the tiny foal, less than a week old, it was a sound that had become synonymous with terror. His spindly legs, still uncertain and wobbly, trembled not just from the cold, but from a deep, primal fear. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. 3 days ago, his world had been the warm, comforting presence of his mother, her soft nuzzles, and the rich taste of her milk. That world had been violently shattered in a terrifying whirlwind of snarling teeth and desperate whinnies as a pack of wolves had descended upon them in the twilight hours. His mother, in a final heroic act, had driven him away, her own body creating a barrier that allowed him to escape into the dense brush. He had run, blind with panic, until his legs gave out, and when he had finally dared to return, there was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nothing left but the chilling scent of death on the wind and a silence more terrifying than any sound. Now he was a tiny, insignificant speck in an endless sea of grass, a fragile life flickering against the overwhelming power of nature. His coat, a pale, creamy white, offered little camouflage and even less warmth. Hunger was a constant, gnawing ache in his belly, a cruel reminder of the life-giving source he had lost. Thirst had driven him to a small, muddy creek, but the water was icy and unsatisfying. He had called out for his mother until his throat was raw, his small, desperate whinnies swallowed by the indifferent wind. By the third day, a profound and hopeless despair had settled over him. He was dying, and he knew it. He had stumbled into a small ravine, seeking a momentary respite from the biting wind, and had collapsed, his energy completely spent. The will to stand, to search, to hope, had evaporated. He curled his legs beneath him, tucked his head down, and resigned himself to his fate, the vast, cold sky his only witness. Have you ever felt a loneliness so profound it feels like a physical weight, a crushing certainty that you are invisible to the world? That is the abyss where this tiny foal found himself, on the very precipice of life and death. What the foal didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that he was not entirely alone. From the ridge overlooking the ravine, a pair of ancient, dark eyes watched his every move. They belonged to a creature as old and weathered as the landscape itself, a solitary old bison who had long been an outcast from his own kind. He was known to the local ranchers and the few park rangers who patrolled this remote territory only as Scarlip, a name earned from a jagged, poorly healed wound that split his upper lip, giving him a permanent, fearsome snarl. Scarlip was a giant, even by bison standards, his massive head a tangled mane of dark fur, his shoulders a mountain of muscle that had seen more than 2 decades of harsh winters and brutal summers. His hide was a roadmap of his violent past, crisscrossed with the scars of countless battles with rivals and predators. He had lost his place as a dominant bull years ago, driven from his herd by a younger, stronger challenger. Since then, he had wandered the plains alone, a silent, brooding monarch in exile. He was a creature of routine and solitude, wary of everything and trusting of nothing. Most animals gave him a wide berth, sensing the aura of contained violence that clung to him like his own shadow. Yet, for the past hour, this formidable, isolated beast had been utterly transfixed by the sight of the collapsing foal. He watched as the tiny creature gave up, as its last flicker of fight seemed to extinguish. Something stirred within the old bison, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a strange and unwelcome ache in his massive chest. It was an echo of a memory, a ghost of a time when he too had stood over a small, fragile life, his own calf, lost to a late spring blizzard. The pain of that loss had been a wound far deeper than any physical scar. With a low grunt that seemed to emanate from the very earth, Scarlip began to move. His descent into the ravine was slow and deliberate, his massive hooves dislodging stones as he navigated the steep incline. The foal heard the approach, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. He lifted his head with the last of his strength, his heart seizing with a fresh wave of terror. The creature blocking the pale light of the sky was a monster. A dark mountain of fur and horn, the embodiment of every fear he had ever known. This was it, the final terrifying moment. He closed his eyes, expecting the crushing impact, the final searing pain. But it didn't come. Instead, he felt a puff of warm, grassy breath against his neck. He dared to open his eyes a fraction. The bison's enormous head was just inches from his own. The ancient, dark eyes, which should have held aggression or predatory hunger, held something else entirely, an expression of profound, weary sadness. Scarlett lowered his massive head further, and with a gentleness that defied his fearsome appearance, he nudged the foal's flank with his nose. It wasn't a push or a threat. It was a question, an offering of contact. He then did something even more extraordinary. He laid down. The effort for an animal of his size and age was immense. A series of controlled grunts and groans until his huge body settled onto the cold ground beside the foal, creating an instant living wall against the relentless wind. The foal, weak and terrified, was now sheltered in the lee of this giant, unexpected guardian. For a long time they simply stayed there, the ancient, scarred bison and the orphaned, dying foal. Two lonely souls finding a moment of shared stillness in a harsh, unforgiving world. The old bull's presence was a shield, his body heat a faint but tangible comfort. What could possibly motivate this solitary, battle-hardened outcast to offer comfort to a creature of a different species? Was it a flicker of memory, a moment of empathy, or something far deeper and more mysterious at play? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the journey these two are about to embark on will challenge everything you think you know about the laws of nature. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of purple and orange, the foal's shivering slowly began to subside. The sheer mass of the old bison beside him acted as a furnace, radiating a steady, life-giving warmth that seeped into his chilled bones. Scarlett remained motionless, a silent, breathing mountain of fur, his rhythmic breaths a calming, constant presence in the growing darkness. The foal, exhausted but no longer freezing, drifted into a fitful sleep, the first real rest he'd had in 3 days. But Scarlett did not sleep. He remained vigilant, his head raised, his ears swiveling to catch every distant sound, his nostrils tasting the wind for any hint of danger. He was a sentinel, a guardian assuming a duty he hadn't sought, but now seemed unable to abandon. The night was long and filled with the distant calls of coyotes, sounds that would have sent the foal into a frenzy of panic. But nestled against the solid wall of the bison, he felt a sense of security that was entirely new. It was as if the old bull's silent strength was a language he could understand, a promise of safety in a world that had only shown him violence. If this incredible story of an unlikely bond is touching your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to share more tales of compassion and courage from the animal kingdom, proving that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Every subscription helps these amazing stories reach a wider audience. When dawn broke, the foal awoke to a strange sensation. Scarlett was gently prodding his back with his massive nose, a persistent, rhythmic nudging. The foal was weak, and the gnawing hunger in his belly had returned with a vengeance. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. Scarlett nudged him again, more insistently this time, a low grunt accompanying the push. It was clear what he wanted. He wanted the foal to get up. Summoning a reserve of energy he didn't know he possessed, the foal tried again, his legs trembling violently. This time, as he wobbled, Scarlett shifted his huge body, positioning himself so the foal could lean against his sturdy flank for support. Using the bison as a living crutch, the foal finally managed to get to his feet. He was unsteady, but he was standing. Scarlip then turned and began to walk slowly out of the ravine, pausing every few steps to look back, ensuring his small wobbly charge was following. The foal, driven by an instinct to stay close to this newfound source of safety, stumbled after him. Their journey was painfully slow. The foal could only manage a few dozen yards before needing to rest. Each time he stopped, Scarlip would wait patiently, never straying more than a few feet away, his body a constant shield against the wind. The bison led him not toward the open plains, but toward a densely wooded area, a thicket of cottonwood and aspen trees that the foal would have never dared to enter alone. Inside the woods, the environment was different. The trees broke the wind, and the ground was covered in a layer of soft, damp leaves. Scarlip led him to a small, secluded meadow where a spring bubbled up from the ground, creating a pool of clear, fresh water. The foal drank deeply, the cool water soothing his raw throat, but water wasn't enough. The hunger was becoming debilitating. He looked around helplessly, his instincts screaming for his mother's milk, a source of nourishment that no longer existed. Scarlip, observing the foal's distress, seemed to understand. He began to use his massive head and horns to thrash at the low-hanging branches of the surrounding willow trees, breaking them off and letting them fall to the ground. He then nudged the tender, budding leaves toward the foal. The foal, hesitant at first, sniffed at the offering. He had never eaten solid food before, but the scent was fresh and appealing. He nibbled at a leaf, his baby teeth struggling with the texture. It wasn't milk, but it was something. He ate slowly, his body craving any form of sustenance. For the rest of the day, Scarlip continued this strange foraging, breaking off the most tender shoots and leaves and pushing them toward the foal. It was an act of such deliberate care, such profound understanding of another's needs, that it defied all explanation. This wasn't instinct, this was a conscious effort to provide. That evening, as they rested in the secluded meadow, a new threat emerged. The chilling, unmistakable howls of a wolf pack echoed through the trees, closer this time. The foal's blood ran cold. He scrambled to his feet, every nerve ending screaming with the memory of his mother's death. He instinctively pressed himself against Scarlip's side, seeking refuge behind the massive wall of his protector. The old bison rose to his feet, not with panic, but with a slow, deliberate gravity. He positioned the foal behind him, pushing him gently with his head until the small horse was completely shielded by his body. Scarlip faced the direction of the howls, his head lowered, his scarred lip curled back in a snarl that was no longer just a feature of his injury, but a clear and present threat. He let out a low, rumbling bellow, a sound of pure, defiant power that seemed to shake the very trees around them. It was a challenge, a declaration to the approaching predators that this ground was protected, that the small, vulnerable life behind him was not easy prey. The wolves, intelligent and calculating, understood the message. They were hunters of opportunity, and attacking a full-grown, aggressive bison for the sake of a tiny foal was a risk that promised more injury than reward. The howls faded into the distance as the pack moved on in search of an easier meal. Scarlip remained in his defensive stance for a long time, his body a fortress, until the forest was once again silent. He had not just offered comfort or food. He had offered his own body as a shield, facing down the very predators that had orphaned his young charge. Do you believe that animals can feel empathy and make conscious choices to protect others, even those of a different species? Or is this simply a case of misplaced parental instinct? Tell us what you think, because the ultimate test of their bond was yet to come. A challenge from nature itself that would push them both to the absolute limit. For 2 weeks, the strange interspecies family not only survived, but began to thrive in their secluded sanctuary. The foal, who the park rangers would have named Ghost, for his pale coat had they known he existed, grew stronger each day under Scarlip's unorthodox care. He learned to eat the tender leaves and grasses that the old bison provided, his body slowly adapting to the new diet. His legs grew stronger, his initial wobbliness replaced by a youthful energy that sometimes manifested in small, playful bucks and kicks. Scarlip, for his part, seemed to have been transformed by his new role. The brooding, solitary outcast had become a dedicated, full-time guardian. He never strayed far from Ghost, his life now revolving around the needs of this small, fragile creature. He would lead the foal to the safest grazing spots, stand guard while he drank from the spring, and at night, he would lie down in a way that offered Ghost maximum protection from the elements. There was a softness in the old bull's eyes that had never been there before, a sense of purpose that had replaced his weary resignation. It was as if caring for this orphan had healed a piece of his own broken past. The deep, jagged scar on his lip remained, but the fearsome snarl it created seemed less menacing, softened by the gentle way he would nuzzle the foal's back. This period of peace, however, was a fragile illusion in the harsh reality of the Montana wilderness. A late spring storm, a phenomenon the locals called a gully washer, was brewing in the mountains. Dark, heavy clouds gathered on the horizon, and the air grew thick and still with a palpable sense of foreboding. The storm hit without warning, a sudden and violent deluge that turned the peaceful forest into a chaotic nightmare. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and the wind howled through the trees with the sound of a freight train. The small, secluded meadow began to flood, the spring overflowing its banks and turning the ground into a treacherous, muddy bog. Scarlip, sensing the danger, immediately began to lead Ghost toward higher ground. But the terrain was slick and unstable. The foal, despite his growing strength, was no match for the sucking mud and the force of the rising water. He slipped and fell, his small body instantly soaked and chilled. He struggled to get up, but the mud held him fast. Scarlip immediately turned back, positioning his massive body to shield Ghost from the worst of the driving rain. He nudged and pushed, trying to help the foal regain his footing, but it was no use. The water was rising too quickly, swirling around them in a cold, brown torrent. The ravine that had once offered them shelter was now becoming a deadly trap. The water, once a gentle creek, had become a raging river, and it was pulling at the foal, threatening to sweep him away. Scarlip, seeing the imminent danger, made a decision born of pure desperation and incredible strength. He wedged his own body against a cluster of sturdy cottonwood trees, creating a living dam against the current. He then reached out with his head and hooked his horns gently under the foal's belly, lifting him. It was a maneuver that required immense power and surgical precision. With a groan that was a mixture of exertion and defiance, the old bison lifted the foal clear of the strongest part of the current, pinning him safely between his own body and the trees. For what felt like an eternity, Scarlip stood his ground as the storm raged around them. The waters surged against him, a relentless, powerful force that would have swept away almost any other creature. But the old bull was immovable, a rock against the flood. He trembled with the sheer effort of resisting the current and holding the foal safe, his muscles bunched and straining. Ghost, terrified and cold, was pressed against him. His telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Life dependent entirely on the strength and will of his unlikely protector, hours passed. The storm finally began to break, the rain lessening to a steady drizzle, the wind losing its terrifying force. The floodwaters began to recede, leaving behind a landscape of mud and debris. Scarlip, exhausted to his core, gently lowered the foal back onto the now sodden but stable ground. The old bison was trembling from exhaustion, his breathing heavy and labored. He had expended a colossal amount of energy, pushing his aged body to its absolute limits. He had faced down wolves and now had defied a flood, all for a tiny creature he had met only weeks before. This was more than instinct. This was a bond forged in shared hardship, a testament to a connection that transcended species. In the aftermath of the storm, as the first rays of sun broke through the clouds, a figure on horseback appeared on the ridge overlooking the valley. It was Jedediah Jed Stone, a park ranger who had been patrolling the area for over 40 years. He was checking for flood damage when he spotted them through his binoculars, the legendary, unapproachable Scarlip, and nestled beside him, a tiny white foal that shouldn't have been there. Jed had known Scarlip for years, had always seen him as a dangerous and tragic figure, a king in exile. But what he was witnessing now caused him to lower his binoculars and rub his eyes in disbelief. The fearsome old bull was gently grooming the foal's wet coat with his rough tongue, an act of such tender intimacy that it defied everything Jed knew about wildlife behavior. He raised his radio to his mouth, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. "Dispatch, this is Jed. You're not going to believe what I'm looking at. I've found Scarlip, and it looks like he's adopted a foal." The story of Scarlip and Ghost spread like wildfire through the small communities bordering the national park. Yet's initial report, backed up by the stunning photographs he took from a distance, became a local sensation. Wildlife experts were baffled. While there were occasional anecdotal accounts of interspecies interactions, a long-term adoption like this, especially involving a notoriously solitary and aggressive bull like Scarlip, was virtually unheard of. Dr. Alana Reed, a renowned wildlife biologist from Bozeman, made the trip to the remote sector of the park to observe the pair for herself. She set up discreet cameras and spent weeks documenting their interactions, her scientific skepticism slowly giving way to pure awe. "What we are witnessing is extraordinary," she explained in an interview with a regional newspaper. "This isn't just about protection. The bull is actively teaching the foal. He's showing him what to eat, where to find shelter, how to read the signs of an approaching predator. He has assumed every role of a mother, a commitment that is staggering from a biological standpoint. This goes beyond any known behavioral paradigm for his species." The Park Service, recognizing the unique and fragile nature of the bond, made the decision to close off the section of the park where the pair resided, protecting them from a flood of potential tourists and media. They became a protected secret, a living legend whispered about by rangers and locals. Jed Stone made it a point to check on them every few days, his patrols now imbued with a new sense of purpose. He would watch from a distance as Ghost, growing bigger and more confident, would playfully chase after Scarlip, nipping at his tail, while the old bull would tolerate the antics with a patience that was almost comical. As months turned into a year, Ghost was no longer a tiny, fragile foal. He was a handsome young stallion, his white coat gleaming in the sun, his strides long and powerful. He had learned the ways of the wilderness not from a horse, but from a bison. He was tougher, more resilient, and more aware of his surroundings than any horse raised in a domestic herd. His bond with Scarlip had only deepened. They were an inseparable, if unconventional pair. Ghost, with his superior eyesight and speed, would often act as the lookout, alerting the aging Scarlip to any potential dangers. Scarlip, in turn, remained the immovable fortress, the ultimate protector whose presence deterred any predator from coming too close. One autumn afternoon, Jed watched a scene that brought tears to his eyes. A small herd of wild horses had wandered into the valley, the first Ghost had seen since his birth. A young Mare, curious about the white stallion, approached him. Ghost was hesitant, looking back at Scarlip as if for permission. The old bison watched the interaction with his ancient, wise eyes. He gave a soft grunt, a sound Jed had come to recognize as one of contentment, and then deliberately turned and walked a short distance away, giving the young horse space. It was a profound act of letting go, an acknowledgement that the foal he had raised needed to find his own kind. Ghost spent some time with the other horses, a clear connection forming. But as the herd prepared to move on at sunset, he made a choice. He trotted back to the old bison's side, nuzzled his scarred face, and stood with him as the wild horses disappeared over the ridge. He had found his own kind, but he had chosen his family. He was staying with the one who had saved him, the one who had taught him how to live. Years passed. Scarlett grew old, his movements slower, his massive frame leaner. The fire in his eyes had softened to a gentle glow. Ghost, now a magnificent stallion in his prime, became the old bull's protector. He would find the most sheltered spots for Scarlett to rest during the harsh winters, and would stand guard over him, chasing away any creature that ventured too near. Their roles had reversed, the protected now the protector, a perfect, beautiful circle of life and loyalty. The end came peacefully one spring morning, almost a decade after they had first met in the ravine. Jed found Scarlett lying beneath a giant cottonwood tree, his journey over. Ghost stood vigil beside him, his head lowered, his powerful body a shield even in death. He remained there for 2 full days, a silent, heartbreaking tribute to the guardian, who had defied the laws of nature to give him a life. The story of the bison who adopted a foal became a permanent part of the park's history, a tale told to new rangers and wide-eyed visitors, a testament to the idea that family is not always about blood, but about love, loyalty, and the unexpected connections that can heal even the deepest wounds. Ghost eventually did join a wild herd, becoming a legendary lead stallion known for his intelligence and protective nature, skills he had learned from the most unlikely of teachers. The legacy of Scarlett, the outcast bull with the scarred lip, wasn't one of violence or solitude, but of a love so powerful it had bridged the gap between 2 species and created a story that would echo through the Montana valleys forever. It reminds us that even in the most broken and scarred individuals, there can exist a capacity for gentleness and love that has the power to change the world for one small, lost soul. What did the story of Scarlett and Ghost teach you about the nature of love and family? Share your reflections in the comments below, because these are the stories that remind us of the incredible, beautiful mysteries that still exist in the wild heart of our world. The legend of Ghost, the white stallion raised by a bison, did not end with the quiet passing of his guardian. In many ways, that was merely the end of the first chapter. The true test of Scarlett's legacy was not in how Ghost survived, but in how he would choose to live and, ultimately, how he would lead. After standing his lonely vigil, Ghost had eventually connected with a herd of wild horses, drawn by the primal need for companionship. His striking appearance and quiet, powerful demeanor quickly set him apart. He was not like other stallions. While they postured and fought with flashy displays of aggression, Ghost possessed a deep, unnerving stillness, a rootedness that came from being raised by a creature who met challenges, not with flight, but with unyielding force. The other horses didn't understand him at first. His methods were alien. During their first encounter with a stalking mountain lion, the herd's instinct was to scatter in a panic, a chaotic explosion of hooves and whinnies. But Ghost did not run. Instead, he wheeled around to face the predator, lowered his head, and stomped a powerful hoof, a gesture so profoundly bovine, so reminiscent of Scarlett's defiance, that the other horses faltered in their flight, turning back to stare. He then began to nudge the mares and foals, pushing them into a tight circle behind him, creating a defensive wall of bodies with himself as the spear point. The mountain lion, accustomed to picking off a panicked straggler, was completely baffled by this organized bison-like defense. Faced with a united front and a lead stallion who showed absolutely no fear, the predator abandoned the hunt. This single event cemented Ghost's position. He became their leader not through aggression towards his own kind, but through an unparalleled ability to protect them from the outside world. He taught them, through action and example, the wisdom of the bison. They learned to stand together, to form defensive circles around their young, and to read the land with a patience and intentionality that was Scarlip's enduring gift. The herd flourished under his leadership, becoming known to the few who observed them as the bison herd of horses, a uniquely resilient and intelligent group. Jedstone, even in his retirement, would often drive his old truck to the edge of the parklands, glassing the distant hills with his binoculars for a glimpse of the white stallion. Watching Ghost lead his herd was, for Jed, a kind of spiritual observance. He saw the echo of Scarlip in every deliberate movement, in every protective stance. "He's not just leading them," Jed would murmur to himself, a lump forming in his throat. "He's teaching them a whole new way to be. He's teaching them to be brave." Jed had shared his observations with Dr. Alana Reed, who had since published several influential papers on the Scarlip ghost phenomenon. Her work had ignited a fierce debate in the scientific community about cross-species teaching and the depth of animal cognition. Ghost was no longer just a curiosity. He was a living, breathing paradigm shift, and his herd was a unique case study in learned behavioral adaptation. Do you believe that learned behaviors can be passed across species? That the lessons of one animal's life can fundamentally change the destiny of another's entire community? It's a profound thought, and the story of Ghost's leadership was proving it to be true every single day on those Montana plains. But the plains were changing. For 3 consecutive years, the spring rains were sparse, and the summer sun was mercilessly hot. A deep and persistent drought began to settle into the land, choking the life from the once lush valleys. The grasses turned from green to a brittle, dusty brown. Creeks and springs that had flowed for generations slowed to a trickle, and then vanished entirely, leaving behind cracked, sun-baked mud. The drought was a slow, creeping disaster, and it tested Ghost's leadership in a way no predator could. The abundance they had known gave way to a desperate scarcity. The herd grew thin, their ribs beginning to show beneath their coats. The foals, usually full of playful energy, became listless and weak. The harmony of the herd began to fray around the edges as competition for the last patches of edible grass, and the few remaining water sources grew fierce. Ghost's bison-like patience was put to the ultimate test. He would spend days scouting, traveling miles in search of sustenance for his family, always returning to lead them on long, arduous journeys to small, hidden pockets of life he had discovered. He always let the foals and their mothers drink and eat first, standing guard with a quiet authority that quelled any disputes before they could begin. His own body grew leaner, the powerful muscles less defined, but his spirit remained unbroken. Jed watched the progression of the drought with a growing sense of dread. He saw the toll it was taking on all the wildlife, but his heart ached for Ghost and his herd. He knew the white stallion was pushing himself to the limit, his responsibilities weighing heavily on his powerful shoulders. One sweltering afternoon, Jed saw the herd gathered on a high, barren ridge. They were looking west, towards a distant, hazy mountain range. Jed knew what they were contemplating. The high country often held moisture long after the lowlands had dried up, but it was treacherous, unfamiliar territory, full of steep canyons and rocky passes that were dangerous for horses. It was a desperate gamble. That night, a dry lightning storm rolled through the region. It brought no rain, only a terrifying display of celestial fireworks. Jed sat on his porch, watching the sky, a knot of anxiety tightening in his gut. It was the perfect recipe for disaster. His fears were realized. At dawn, a faint, acrid smell tainted the air, and a plume of dark smoke was visible on the western horizon, near the very mountains where Ghost had been looking. A wildfire, sparked by the lightning, was consuming the bone-dry forests. And it was moving fast, pushed by the relentless prairie winds, directly towards the valley that had been Ghost's home. His phone rang. It was Dr. Reed. "Jed, I'm seeing the fire reports. It's bad. And it's heading right for the herd's last known location. The Park Service is mobilizing, but in this wind, containment is almost impossible." Yet's heart sank. "He was thinking of heading that way, Alana," he said, his voice heavy. "He was looking for water. He might be leading them right into the heart of it." The ultimate challenge was no longer wolves or floods. It was an apocalypse of fire, a roaring inferno that threatened to erase everything in its path. How could even the learned wisdom of a bison prepare a herd of horses for a wall of flames? The strength and courage Ghost had inherited from Scarlip were about to face their most terrible trial. The fire moved with a terrifying, unholy speed. It devoured the dry forest with a deafening roar, a sound like 1,000 freight trains, and leaped across canyons with impossible ease. The sky turned a sickening orange-black, and the air grew thick with smoke that burned the eyes and choked the lungs. Panic seized the wildlife. Deer, elk, and coyotes fled in a mindless terror, their ancient rivalries forgotten in the face of a common, all-consuming enemy. Ghost and his herd were caught in the path of this monstrous advance. The smell of smoke and the sight of the approaching wall of flame sent waves of primal fear through the horses. Their instincts screamed at them to bolt, to run blindly and wildly away from the horror. Several of the younger horses broke away, their eyes wide with terror, but Ghost was a rock. In the tide of their panic, he galloped into their path, cutting them off, using his own body as a barrier. He whinnied, not with fear, but with a sharp, commanding authority that cut through their hysteria. He pushed them back towards the others, forcing them to regroup. He knew that a scattered herd was a dead herd. Their only hope was to stay together and move with purpose. But where could they go? Fire was on one side, and the barren, waterless plains were on the other. It was then that Scarlip's greatest lesson surfaced in his mind. The old bison had taught him to read the land, to understand its contours, its hidden strengths and weaknesses. He remembered a place they had sheltered during a blizzard years ago, a wide, rocky riverbed, mostly dry now from the drought, but flanked by high, sheer cliffs of granite. The rock would not burn. The wide, open space of the riverbed might offer a refuge from the worst of the flames. It was their only chance. He began to drive his herd towards it, a grueling, desperate race against the inferno. The heat was becoming intense, and embers rained down around them like malevolent red snow. The smoke was a physical entity, a suffocating blanket that made every breath an agony. As they scrambled down a steep embankment into the relative safety of the riverbed, Ghost did a quick, desperate count of his herd. They were all there, terrified and exhausted, but together. Just as he was about to urge them further down the riverbed, a sound reached him. A faint, high-pitched cry nearly lost in the roar of the fire. It was a sound of pure terror and loneliness, a sound he recognized in the very marrow of his bones. He turned, his eyes scanning the burning ridge from which they had just fled. There, silhouetted against the flames, was a small, clumsy figure, stumbling and crying out in confusion. It was a bison calf, no more than a few months old, its fur singed, its eyes wild with fear. It had been separated from its mother and its herd in the chaotic exodus. Now it was trapped, with fire on one side and a steep drop on the other. The herd whinnied nervously, urging him to go, to save them, to leave the calf to its fate. It was not their kind. Saving it would mean delaying their own escape, risking everything for a stranger. For a fleeting moment, Ghost was torn. His responsibility was to his herd, his family. But as he looked at the terrified calf, he didn't see a stranger. He saw himself, all those years ago, a tiny, helpless foal collapsing in a ravine, alone, and waiting to die. He saw Scarlip, a creature of a different species, descending from a ridge to offer salvation. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an echo, a debt, a legacy that had to be honored. With a commanding call to his herd to stay put, Ghost wheeled around and charged back up the embankment, back towards the fire. He reached the terrified calf and did not hesitate. He pushed it with his head, not gently this time, but with a firm, urgent force, turning it away from the flames and herding it towards the steep path down to the riverbed. The calf, disoriented and terrified, resisted at first, but Ghost was insistent, his presence a strange mixture of command and comfort. As they scrambled back down, a massive burning pine tree crashed down behind them, cutting off their path, and showering them with a terrifying cascade of sparks. They had made it just in time. Ghost herded the small, trembling calf towards the center of his own herd. The horses, uncertain but trusting their leader, parted to let the small bison in. Ghost then organized them just as he had against the wolves, creating a tight defensive circle, with the foals and the new, adopted calf protected in the very center. He stood at the edge of the circle, facing the fire, his white coat now gray. With soot and ash, his body a shield, just as Scarlett had once been for him. The fire raged on both sides of the river canyon, the heat so intense it was hard to breathe. For hours, they stood in their sanctuary of rock as the world burned around them. Ghost remained unwavering, a symbol of impossible courage, a stallion. With the heart of a bison, protecting his own family and a lost soul who had crossed his path. He was paying his debt to Scarlett in the most profound way possible, by becoming him. The firestorm lasted for 2 days. When it had finally passed, it left behind a world of black and gray. The once vibrant valley was a smoldering, skeletal landscape. But in the center of the wide, rocky riverbed, the bison herd had survived. They were exhausted, traumatized, and covered in soot, but they were alive. And with them was a small, weary bison calf. As the smoke began to clear, 2 figures appeared. At the edge of the canyon, it was Jed Stone and Dr. Alana Reed. They had spent the last 48 hours working with the fire crews, their hearts heavy with the near certainty that they had lost Ghost and his entire herd. When the call came over the radio that a group of horses had been spotted alive in the dry riverbed, they had rushed to the location, not daring to hope. Through her binoculars, Dr. Reed surveyed the scene, and her breath caught in her throat. "Jed, look," she whispered, handing him the binoculars. Jed focused the lenses, and his old, tired eyes filled with tears. There, in the center of the exhausted group of horses, stood Ghost, his once white coat a mess of ash. And pressed close against his side, seeking comfort and safety, was the bison calf. The stallion, the hero of the plains, had come full circle. He had faced down his own past in the form of that lost calf, and had not flinched from the responsibility. The legacy was complete. "He did it, Alana," Jed said, his voice thick with emotion. "The old boy taught him so well. He taught him what really matters." The story of Ghost's survival and his rescue of the bison calf became the final, most powerful chapter in his legend. It was proof that the love and courage shown by Scarlett years ago was not an isolated miracle, but a seed that had been planted. That seed had grown, blossomed, and now spread its own seeds of compassion. Ghost would raise the young bison, whom Jed fittingly named Ember, as one of his own, a strange and wonderful addition to his unique family. Their story would serve as an enduring symbol of hope in the fire-ravaged valley, a reminder that even after the most devastating destruction, new life can emerge, and that the greatest legacy one can leave is the courage and kindness instilled in the heart of another. The lessons of the outcast bull had not only saved a foal, but had gone on to create a leader, save a herd, and give hope to a new generation, proving that a single act of compassion can ripple through time, changing the world in ways we can never fully imagine. The days that followed the fire were a silent, monochrome nightmare. The vibrant greens and golds of the valley had been replaced by a uniform blanket of black soot and gray ash. The air, thick with the ghostly smell of a world incinerated, was still and heavy. For Ghost and his herd, survival was a grim, moment-to-moment struggle in a landscape that offered no comfort. The water in the riverbed was fouled with ash, tasting of bitterness and death. The once lush grasses were gone, leaving behind only charred earth that puffed up in clouds of dust with every hoof fall. The trauma of the fire lingered in the herd's eyes. They were skittish, jumping at the sound of a falling, burnt-out branch, their sleep troubled by the memory of the roaring flames. It was in this desolate world that Ghost's leadership, forged by Scarlip's wisdom, was tested most profoundly. He was no longer just a protector against immediate threats. He had to become a provider, a healer, a beacon of hope in a dead world. While the other horses pawed helplessly at the barren ground, Ghost seemed to draw upon a deeper well of knowledge. He led them away from the fouled river and up into the rocky hills, to a place where Scarlip had once shown him how to find water seeping from between layers of shale. The water was a mere trickle, but it was clean and pure. It took hours for the whole herd to drink, but Ghost stood with infinite patience, ensuring the foals and the mothers drank their fill before he allowed himself a sip. Food was an even greater challenge. Ghost began doing something the other horses found utterly alien. He used his hooves to dig, not pawing randomly, but systematically excavating the earth at the base of certain fire-resistant shrubs, unearthing the starchy, tuberous roots beneath. It was a lesson from Scarlip, who had used his massive head to plow the earth in lean times. Ghost taught his herd this new skill, and soon the desperate horses were digging for their own sustenance, finding life where it seemed none existed. Ember, the small bison calf, was his constant shadow. The fire had bonded him to the white stallion with an unbreakable intensity. He was too small to dig for roots effectively, and his instincts cried out for a mother's milk he would never have again. Ghost, in an act of incredible empathy, would spend hours chewing the tough roots himself, softening them into a digestible pulp before nudging the makeshift meal toward the calf. It was a slow, laborious process, but it kept the small bison alive. The two of them, the soot-covered white stallion and the singed, lonely bison calf, became a symbol of life's stubborn refusal to surrender. From a safe distance, Jed and Dr. Reed documented this extraordinary struggle for survival. The Park Service had authorized emergency hay drops for the other displaced wildlife, creating feeding stations to prevent mass starvation. The debate over whether to include Ghost's herd was intense. "If we feed them, we interfere," Alana argued passionately during a conference call with park officials. "We make them dependent. What Ghost is doing, what he is teaching them, is unprecedented. He's creating a new culture of survival based on learned, cross-species knowledge. To interrupt that now would be a scientific tragedy." Jed agreed, though his heart ached every time he saw the herd's prominent ribs. "That stallion is teaching them to save themselves," Jed insisted. "Dropping hay would be an insult to him. It would be telling him his efforts aren't enough. And right now, belief that they are enough is the only thing keeping them going." Reluctantly, the Park Service agreed to hold off, classifying Ghost's herd as a unique research case. They would observe, but not interfere, unless the situation became dire. This decision placed an immense weight of responsibility on the two observers. They were now the custodians of this incredible story, bound to witness its outcome, whether it be triumph or tragedy. They were watching a legend unfold in real time, a testament to the fact that leadership isn't just about strength, but about wisdom, innovation, and the relentless will to find life in the ashes. Weeks turned into a month. The first green shoots, coaxed by a single merciful rain shower, began to poke through the blackened earth. The valley was beginning to breathe again. It was during this fragile period of early recovery that a new challenge appeared on the horizon. A herd of bison, gaunt and grim from their own ordeal with the fire and drought, moved slowly into the valley. They were a formidable sight, a walking army of dark, shaggy muscle, and they were led by a bull even larger than Scarlip had been. This was Titan, a prime bull whose aggressive dominance was legendary. He led his herd with an iron will, his temper as volatile as a summer storm. As they moved across the valley, Titan's sharp eyes caught sight of Ghost's herd. He saw the strange gathering of horses, and then he saw something that made him stop dead, a low growl rumbling in his massive chest. He saw Ember. He saw a bison calf living among horses, being nuzzled by a white stallion. Titan had lost several calves in the fire and the subsequent chaos. To him, this scene was not a miracle. It was an aberration, a theft. He saw a predator, a horse who had stolen one of his own kind. His grief and anger coalesced into a single furious purpose: to reclaim the calf and destroy the one who had taken him. The confrontation was inevitable. Titan led his herd directly towards the horses, his intent radiating from him in waves of pure aggression. The mares and foals of Ghost's herd whinnied in terror, sensing the approaching danger. They looked to Ghost, their fear-widened eyes begging him to lead them in flight. Running was the horse's answer to this kind of threat. A full-grown, enraged bison bull was not an enemy to be fought, but a force of nature to be fled. But Ghost was not just a horse. He had the soul of a bison, the spirit of a guardian who had taught him to stand his ground. He saw the approaching bull, and while every horse instinct screamed at him to run, Scarlip's legacy roared louder. He nudged Ember behind him, pushed his herd into their now practiced defensive circle, and turned to face Titan alone. He did not lower his head to charge. He did not paw the ground in a display of aggression. He simply stood, a calm white statue against the blackened landscape, his presence a silent, immovable declaration. This far, and no further. The standoff was one of the most surreal moments Jet and Alana had ever witnessed. On one side, a prime bison bull, the epitome of raw, explosive power, snorting and tearing at the ground, demanding a fight. On the other, a white stallion, physically outmatched in every conceivable way, meeting that fury not with aggression, but with an absolute unnerving stillness. It was a clash of two kinds of strength, the power of rage against the power of will. Titan charged. It was not a feint, but a full, earth-shaking assault meant to obliterate the white stallion in a single violent impact. Ghost waited until the last possible second. Then, with a speed and agility that was purely equine, he pivoted away, letting the thundering mass of the bull charge past him. He didn't run. He simply moved aside, and then repositioned himself between Titan and the herd, reclaiming his silent, defiant stance. Titan, furious at having missed, wheeled around and charged again. Again, Ghost evaded, his movements fluid and economical. This wasn't a fight. It was a dance, a dangerous ballet where the stallion used his intelligence and speed to counter the bull's brute force. He was making Titan expend his energy, frustrating him, refusing to engage in the brawl the bull so desperately wanted. Ghost was fighting like Scarlip, but with the body of a horse. He was using his mind. This incredible dance of wills continued for nearly an hour. Titan's charges became slower, his breathing heavier, his rage turning to a confused frustration. The white horse wouldn't fight, but he wouldn't run. He was an unsolvable puzzle. The focus of the conflict slowly shifted to its source. Ember, the small calf, had been watching, torn between the terrifying, magnificent bull who looked like him, and the calm white guardian who was his entire world. Titan stopped his charges and let out a deep, resonant call, a sound meant to summon a calf to its mother. It was a sound Ember had never heard, but it resonated deep within his bison soul. He took a hesitant step away from the horse herd, toward the bull. Ghost did not stop him. He stood aside, giving the calf the freedom to choose. This was Ember's decision to make, and Ghost, in a profound act of love and respect, would not make it for him. The calf walked slowly into the open space between the two herds, his small head turning from the massive bison bull to the white stallion. He looked at Titan, a symbol of the family he had lost, the biological imperative of his own kind. Then, he looked back at Ghost, the one who had charged back into a fire for him, the one who had softened roots for him, the one who was standing against an impossible force for him right now. Ember paused, his small body trembling. Then, with a certainty that was heartbreakingly clear, he walked back to Ghost's side and pressed his face against the stallion's leg. He had made his choice. Family was not blood. Family was love. Family was rescue. Titan watched this, and a visible change came over him. The rage in his eyes did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, confusion, and perhaps a flicker of understanding. He saw his calf, safe and unafraid, choose another. He saw a horse who had done what he, the great leader, could not. Save a child from the fire. The bull let out a low, weary grunt. He turned, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of a reality he could not change, and slowly led his herd away. The crisis had passed. Ghost had not won through violence, but through courage, wisdom, and the profound power of letting another being choose. In the days that followed, a strange and beautiful thing began to happen in the recovering valley. The two herds did not merge, but they no longer kept their distance. Led by their two powerful, very different leaders, they began to share the valley's scarce resources. The bison, with their immense strength, could break through ice in the winter and clear paths that the horses could use. The horses, with their keen eyesight and swiftness, often alerted the bison to distant dangers long before they were aware of them. A new, unprecedented ecosystem of cooperation began to form, a partnership born from a standoff that had ended. Not in bloodshed, but in respect. Jed and Alana watched, profoundly moved. They were no longer just scientists or observers. They were witnesses to a living miracle. The legacy of Scarlip, the outcast bull, had not just saved a foal or inspired a leader, it had become a bridge, a force that was healing not just individuals, but an entire community, teaching two anciently distinct species a new way to live together in a world they had to rebuild. The valley, once a place of ash and death, was becoming a cradle for a new kind of hope, a hope built on the radical idea that the deepest connections are not bound by species, but are forged in the fires of shared hardship and the quiet, unbreakable bonds of love. The seasons that followed the Great Fire were a testament to the quiet, stubborn resilience of life. The valley, once a monochrome world of ash, slowly blushed with the returning colors of the wild. First came the vibrant purple of the fireweed, a flower born of devastation, its blossoms a defiant flag of renewal. Then the grasses returned, tentative at first, then in a great, sweeping wave of green that washed over the blackened hills. By the following summer, the valley was transformed. It was not the same as it was before. Stands of skeletal, burnt trees stood like silent monuments to the inferno, but it was vibrantly, beautifully alive. And in this reborn world, the two herds moved as one, a single sprawling family of horse and bison, a living ecosystem of cooperation that defied every known law of the wild. The alliance forged in the crucible of fire and drought was not a fleeting truce, but a new and profound way of life. The partnership was woven into the fabric of their daily existence. During the harsh winter that followed the fire, when snow buried the valley in a deep, silent blanket, it was Titan and his bison who became the saviors. Their massive bodies and powerful heads acted as living plows, clearing paths through snowdrifts that the lighter horses could never have breached. They opened up access to sheltered groves where windswept slopes had left patches of grass exposed. The horses, in return, became the eyes and ears of the collective. From higher ground, their keen vision would spot the approach of wolf packs, long before the bison, with their earthbound gaze, could perceive the threat. A sharp, urgent whinny from a horse sentinel would send the bison lumbering into a defensive formation, their young protected long before the danger was upon them. It was a symbiosis of strength and vigilance, a society where the inherent gifts of one species compensated for the limitations of the other. At the heart of this new world was Ember, the bison calf. Now a sturdy, confident yearling, was the physical and spiritual bridge between the two families. He moved with a unique fluidity between the herds, a citizen of both nations. From Ghost, he had learned a quiet watchfulness, a habit of finding high ground to survey the world with a patient, intelligent gaze. He understood the soft, gentle nudges and commands of the lead stallion. But from Titan and the other bison, he was learning the language of his own kind, the low rumbles of contentment, the sharp snorts of warning, the intricate social hierarchy of the herd. He would spend his mornings grazing alongside his adoptive father, Ghost, and his afternoons roughhousing with the other young bison bulls, his unique upbringing making him both gentle and powerful. Jed and Alana, observing this, were captivated. "He's bilingual," Alana noted, her voice filled with wonder as she reviewed drone footage. "He understands and responds to the social cues of two entirely different species. He's not a horse, and he's not just a bison. He's something new. He's an ambassador." Jed simply smiled, his gaze fixed on the field monitor where the white stallion and the young brown bison stood side by side. "He's Scarlip's grandchild," he said softly. "That's what he is." The true test of their alliance, however, came not during scarcity, but with the return of abundance. The following spring was lush and wet, and the valley exploded with life. The grazing was rich and endless, the water sources full and clear. With the pressure of survival lifted, old instincts, buried by necessity, began to stir. Titan, the great bison bull, grew proud and territorial, his possessiveness swelling with the richness of the land. He began to claim the most verdant meadow for his own herd, pushing the horses to the periphery with aggressive postures and low, threatening growls. The horses, nervous and unwilling to provoke the massive bull, would retreat. The seamless cooperation of the winter began to show cracks. A palpable tension grew between the two herds. Ghost, ever the diplomat, would attempt to graze his herd near the bison, a calm, non-threatening presence, but Titan would meet him with a wall of hostility. The stallion, unwilling to endanger his herd by forcing a physical confrontation he could not win, would wisely lead them away. The fragile peace was threatening to dissolve. It was Ember who averted the schism. One sun-drenched afternoon, as Titan stood guard at the edge of the lush meadow, blocking the horses, Ember did something extraordinary. He walked out of the horse herd, straight towards the massive, glowering bull. Ghost whinnied softly, a call of caution, but did not stop him. Titan watched the young bull approach, his expression softening slightly as he looked upon the calf he had lost and regained in spirit. Ember did not challenge him. Instead, he began to graze peacefully right at the invisible line Titan had drawn in the grass. After a few moments, he lifted his head, looked toward the horse herd, and gave a soft, low grunt, a sound of invitation he had learned from Ghost. Then, he calmly walked back across the line and began to graze beside the stallion. A few minutes later, he repeated the action, walking back to Titan's side, grazing for a moment, and then returning to Ghost. He was a living shuttle, weaving back and forth, physically erasing the line of conflict. He was demonstrating, with a wisdom beyond his years, that the meadow was not a territory to be owned, but a home to be shared. He was reminding both leaders of the connection they had forged. Titan watched this display, his aggressive posture slowly relaxing. He saw his calf, whole and happy. He saw the white stallion, who was not a rival, but the calf's protector. He looked at the lush grass, vast and plentiful, enough for everyone. With a final deep sigh that seemed to release the last of his tension, Titan turned and led his own herd deeper into the meadow, leaving the way clear. He had not been defeated, he had been reminded. Ghost, in response, led his own herd forward, and soon, the two groups were intermingled, grazing peacefully under the warm sun. The alliance had been tested, and it had held, not by the strength of its leaders, but by the wisdom of its heart, the young bull who was a child of both worlds. Jed and Alana, watching from their distant lookout, felt they were witnessing the birth of a true peaceable kingdom, a legacy of hope that had far surpassed the story of a single heroic bull. It had become a self-sustaining culture, a new chapter in the story of life itself, written in the green ink of the reborn valley. This single quiet act of diplomacy was, perhaps, the most profound event Jed and Alana had ever documented. It was one thing to cooperate when faced with a common enemy or shared hardship. It was another thing entirely to choose community over instinct when abundance had returned. It was a sign of a true, lasting cultural shift. "He's not just a bridge, Jed," Alana said, her voice barely a whisper as she lowered her camera, choosing to simply watch. "He's the architect of their peace. He took a lesson in survival from Ghost, who took it from Scarlett, and he's transformed it into a lesson in coexistence." Jed nodded, his gaze distant. He wasn't thinking about the scientific papers or the research grants. He was thinking of a lonely, scarred old bull who, a decade earlier, had chosen to lie down next to a dying foal. That one simple act of kindness, born of a long-forgotten grief, had not just saved a life. It had rippled through time, creating a hero, saving a herd from fire, and now, it was teaching two species how to share a world. The legacy was no longer just a story of survival. It had become a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of compassion to not only heal wounds, but to build a better, more peaceful world from the ashes of the old. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.